We've had some trouble with the recorder, but hopefully this will work. So. Okay, good evening, and let's get started. So, this is the last class in the series, the Four Radical Ideas, and the idea of Shabbat, of the Sabbath day, is an innovation, a radical idea of Judaism that has really transformed the world, and even just this idea had traction, was adopted in other religions, and was a big part of Western civilization, for the last many years. Since it's the middle of November now, it's the second half of November, we're already in Thanksgiving season, so it's just worth remembering that this country, the pilgrims came here in part because they wanted a more rigorous and robust and strict public Sabbath environment, and that's what drew them to. I'm sorry, I under-anticipated a number of people. So, but if I think if Emily and if you share and you can share, great. Okay. If need be, I'll make more copies. But so that's right. So the Puritans came to New England for like a more. They thought they wanted Shabbat to be more rigorous, and you can read like early Puritan writers, even people centuries, like many years later, like what's his face. Famous, I can't think of it. There's a novelist who, it doesn't matter. Okay, but people who grew up in that, I read Scarlet Letters by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who was not a Puritan, but came from Puritan stock and grew up in New England, and he writes about, with wistfulness, about what the Sabbath was like in New England in his childhood. So it was a distinctive feature. So this is an idea that we created that had traction in other religions and even influenced American history. It brought the Pilgrims here. Okay, the Pilgrims came to America they wanted Shabbat to be more a presence that was felt more. That was a major issue that they had. So let's dive in and look at some sources a history of the idea of Shabbat in Judaism I couldn't do that in one class. That would be like multiple classes. I think Shabbat in the Torah, Shabbat in later biblical literature where the idea gets expanded and its significance gets expanded. Shabbat in rabbinic literature, Shabbat in later Jewish, right? That this is a course or several classes, not just one class. So we're going to look at a handful of ideas that I find particularly meaningful, and hopefully we'll learn something as well. So we'll start with source one, and then we'll flip around a little bit. This I imagine is familiar to most of you, somewhat familiar to most of you. This is the beginning of the second chapter of Genesis. So it's really the end of the first section of Genesis. I mentioned this in Shul a few weeks ago. The division of the Torah into chapters was done by a Christian Bible scholar in the Middle Ages. The Hebrew Bible never had chapters. We adopted those chapter divisions because it's very useful. Because if you want to find a verse, you can chapter and verse. It makes it easy to find. But traditionally, we didn't have chapters in the Torah, so we use them, but we didn't. It's not tradition. It's not from our ancient heritage, nor is it something we thought of. So the Christians who developed the chapters have Genesis chapter 2 starting with these verses here in source 1, but really this is the end of the first creation story. Genesis chapter 1 plus these first verses of chapter 2 is the first creation story, the 7 days of creation, and then after this we get the so-called second creation story, which is the bulk of chapter 2. So it's an interesting editorial choice. Why was this put? Why did this fellow whose name I don't remember, maybe it was Jerome, maybe it was someone else, why did he put this in chapter 2 as opposed to the end of chapter 1 where it fits more naturally? So let's, the heaven and earth were finished and all they were in. So God rested on the seventh day from the work that he had done, and God completed on the seventh day all the work he was doing, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he did. So what's the problem with this verse? There was a problem with this verse that all the early readers were sensitive to, and if you say it so often, it's part of Kiddush, so you say it a lot, maybe you don't pay attention to it. There's a glaring problem in this verse.
Yeah, on the seventh day completed.
Right.
We're completed by the seventh day.
Yeah, so what happened on the seventh day? Did God rest on the seventh day? Or did God, did God finish work on the seventh day? Or did God rest on the seventh day? Vayechal Elohim b'yom hashvi, he finished everything on the seventh day, or vayishbot, or he rested on the seventh day. Which one was it? So how do you want to? What's some answers? He finished creating on the seventh day, but then the second half of the seventh day, like until noon, he was finishing up his creation, and then he punched out. Okay, Emily, you agree?
I think probably he set things in motion that continue to create, even though he himself.
So he could be resting and completing creation at the same time. Okay, like your Shabbos timer, like your Shabbos timer. Okay, Dara,
He
thank
worked
you.
on the seventh day, realized he didn't need to, fired his accountant, blind the numbers.
Okay, good. So he showed up in the office, and he was like, "Oh wait, what am I doing here? Everything's done." Good. Okay. Any other ideas? Yeah, Adam.
That creating Shabbat itself.
Good. So I think that seems to me like
it's sort of a tension with Shabbat, but
good. So I think that's probably, I think it's going to be my best answer, our best answer. But before we get there, we're taking a 3-minute break and making more photocopies. Is that let's take a 3-minute break and I'll make you want.
I'll make.
Okay. You need a password. Actually, so the office is the username, and the code is 5775. All right, thank you very much. So one suggestion that some early translations of the Torah have, and some people suggest this is like a correct reading. I think some of maybe the Septuagint or some of the other Greek translations of the Torah. Anyone ever heard this? You know how they had this verse? That they just amend the verse to solve the problem. They have Elohim, God finished on the 6th day from all the work that he had done. He finished everything on the 6th day, and he rested on the 7th day. So that solves the problem that way. Yes, Rachel?
Could you understand it as he finished it by the seventh day, and then on the seventh day he rested? Like, he didn't work on the seventh day, but by the seventh day.
Yeah, that's sort of, that's right. Right, he had finished on the 7th. That also, yes. That's sort of, and then if you look at,
But you don't have to change the words.
correct. So if you look at Rashi, that's sort of what he says. And most of the Rishonim say along those lines. Creating Shabbat, I think is kind of that's still more. I like that one. The emendation, I think it's a Septuagint. If not, it's some other like ancient other versions of the Torah have that version. There are some Bible scholars who suggested, like really promoted that because it's like solves everything very elegantly or somewhat elegantly. Umberto Cassuto didn't like that. He was a early 20th century Italian Bible scholar, and he points out there's really a poem that it's like 3 lines. It's like 3 stanzas, each of which. Vaychu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chotz no. Vayishbot b'yom hashvi'i mikol malachto asher asa. Yeah, it's 3 stanzas, each with 7 words, each of which have b'yom hashvi'i, the 7th day, in the middle of those. So let's look at this line. Okay, so verse 2, and you can count with me. Vayichal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i Melachto asher asa, 7 words. And then you have Vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa, 7 words. Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i v'kadesh oto. So he thinks it's like a poem, a three-line poem with 7, each line with 7 words, and each like focusing on having at its core by Yom HaShvi'i. And so he thinks the Torah here is emphasizing the 7th day, the 7th day, the 7th day. The 7th day repeats 3 times, each in like these 3 phrases, each of which has 7 words. I think it's kind of neat. And he thinks that's like really, no, the 7th day, the importance of the 7th day, not the 6th day. So if you amend it, you ruin that. So I think the answer is going to be along. Rachel is saying, most of the Rishonim say that it's the completion was done by the 7th day. By the 7th day, it all been done. By 7th day, he had, it was all done because it was all finished already. Versus maybe like Shabbat itself is like a final act of creation by, it's like this new addition into the universe. It's this sanctified time. It's this day without new creation represents something dramatically new. And then question which would also point to why this really belongs like in the first chapter, right? This really should be in Genesis chapter 1. This is really the culmination of the 7 days of creation. This is the pinnacle of the 7th day, the 7 days of creation. So, it could be like could be a, and I wonder if it was even like a deliberate, like, this is total speculation, but like a deliberate Christian effort to de-emphasize the 7th day and as Shabbat that led to kind of putting it as the beginning of chapter 2. That's entirely speculative, but there was a tension in Christianity about when Shabbat would be observed on the 7th day, or at some point it gets switched to the first day, and there were the church fathers, the early church fathers, had to really sort of push their flock, not to celebrate Shabbat not to observe the Sabbath day on Shabbat, but to instead observe it on Sunday. That was an agenda that took time to get people to switch. So maybe this may have something to do with that. But I want to flip now to source 5. We're going to go ahead though, sort of assuming that or going with that approach, that Shabbat itself can be seen as a creation. That gets me to an idea which I encountered in this article, Alan Friedman, whom I think, unless it's a different Friedman, I think I know him. So he published this in the Torah Mata Journal. He's a business person, but he sort of researched this topic. And I think does a very effective job of summarizing some of the primary research. It seems to be that the week with a weekly Sabbath day is a Jewish invention. Like I sort of opened by assuming that, but it seems historically to be true. And when you think about our time units, all of them except for the week are natural, right? The year is, the revolution of the Earth around the sun. The day is the rotation of the Earth on its axis. A month is approximately the orbit of the moon around the Earth. What's a week, right? A week is like, it's not anything, right? It doesn't have any natural correspondence. Yes?
But is it in the lunar cycle? Is it a significant phase in the lunar cycle?
It's not, because a lunar cycle is, meaning if you say a week is sort of 1/4 of a month, but not exactly, right?
Right.
Because a month isn't.
Then again, like solar isn't exactly either, right? So like.
Solar isn't exactly, meaning,
Like it's also 365 and a quarter.
Oh, and a quarter, right. There is no, right.
There is no exact.
There is no exact, right. A year
I don't
is.
know. I don't know if that's the case, but maybe is the week linked somehow to lunar?
Yeah, so I don't think so, because a lunar month is not 28 days, it's like 29 and change, I believe. So you're going to be off. Like that's why even in the Hebrew calendar, like the months don't always work out exactly. Rosh Chodesh is not always on the first Sunday of the month, right? It's just Rosh Chodesh goes all through the days of the week because the weeks and the months don't, even the lunar cycle don't correspond perfectly. So it seems to be an unnatural in that sense. 7 was an important number in the ancient world, like not just Jews, 7 was an important number, so 7 days in that sense it's...
Well, that's what Shavuot is.
Shavuot is... Right, exactly, no, right, indeed. So it is that's not only a Jewish thing, that 7 would be a significant number. I think there are other calendars that were numerous numerical systems that were based on 7. So that you would take 7 days and kind of sort of recognize them. That's not, it's not totally out of nowhere, but it is, it seems we were the first to do it, to celebrate weeks. Weeks seem to be, and I think it came through, I think weeks spread in the Western world through Christianity. Like most Jewish ideas that have like real, like power in the world, the Christians did it for us, and it's just wild to think, because really everywhere in the world, in the East also, in China they have weeks as well, and so here's a concept that every person, just about, right, who participates in the global economy in the modern world, they have the concept of the week, and it seems to come from the Hebrew Bible, which is a pretty interesting thing. So what does it mean? What's the significance? So Alan Friedman argues in this article that it's precisely the unnaturalness of the week that is its significance. It's meant to be a unit of time that isn't based in the natural order, as a way of recognizing really two things. The Torah talks about Shabbat as being commemoration of God resting on the 7th day. That's source 1. The Torah also speaks, book of Exodus, numerous times, Shabbat as being a commemoration of the Exodus. And so both of those things are are representative of, or celebratory of God's being above nature and separate from nature. So the week commemorates God's creation of the universe. So the day and the month and the year, that's nature, that's the universe. But the week shows that God created created the universe and is separate from the universe. And that's what by acknowledging Shabbat, we're acknowledging a God who is not the same as the universe. And the same is true of the Exodus from Egypt is, God operates through history, but is beyond history and above history and separate from history. We're not just, we're not worshiping history. We're not victims of history. That we have a religious outlook in which God is superior to history. And so the unnaturalness of the week, it's God's superiority, separateness from nature on the one hand and history on the other. So that's I don't know. It's that's his article. I think that's an important idea. Reactions or questions to
To that
yeah.
point, Benny Lau gives a lovely Bar Torah on Shemol V'Zachor V'Gilur Chai, which is
Okay.
precisely that.
Oh, I see. Oh, that
It's the idea of
Oh, I see. Shemor v'Zochar, very nice. So one is about
the
creation,
religion.
one is Exodus. Very nice.
Right.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes.
I was going to say that it's interesting to think that if we're under the paradigm that God is operating outside of the natural order, that the week is kind of unique, that it's not based on any sort of natural happenings in space. Those things are operating at a certain time period, presumably for a design reason as well. So it's like those, it's natural that if this is every 29 days, this is every 366 days, whatever. But is that really natural?
I'm not quite
It
sure.
just happens to happen every month, every year.
I'm not quite sure.
I'm just wondering
So sort of
how
yeah.
legitimate or how meaningful it is to say, oh, the week is
Oh, I see.
unnatural.
No. I think it is. I think there's a yeah. I think there's a. Footner spoke about this a lot. I think that even if we acknowledge right. So let's say, right, God created the universe and all the laws of nature and physics and chemistry, those are all somehow the product of creation. It's still possible for people to worship, forget about God and instead worship or nature, right? And that could be that can take the form of ancient paganism, where people are literally worshiping the sun. And Maimonides writes about this, since God, first it was, God made the sun, so it makes sense that we should worship the sun since it's so important to God. And then they forget about God and they just worship the sun. That's Maimonides' theory of the origins of paganism. So that's one dynamic. But there's also a more modern, a modern version of that, where you're not worshiping the sun, but you're worshiping causation, right? You're not worshiping in the sense of religious practice, but in the sense of you live your life beholden to the laws of physics, the laws of nature, biology, whatever it might be, determinism, everything, everything is determined, everything is caused, it's total causation. And you can take those Newtonian physics, every action is the opposite reaction, and the balls hit each other, and that controls not just balls striking each other, but also, and not just the rotation of the planets, but also controls our minds and our consciences and our interaction with other people. And that is probably a lot of people live that way. But that's really being beholden to the 6 days of creation. You're being beholden to the physics and the biology and chemistry that God created, and you're sort of forgetting that there is God. There is a capacity that can sort of step back from that and give it meaning and direct it and sort of gives us the space to make choices. So I think you're right. It's all from God. The year, the month, the day. It's all created by God, but they operate. They operate in this cyclical way without end, and they give rise to this risk of idolatry. That's what I'll say. Right? They can create that sense of determinism and cyclicalness, and where Shabbat is no. There's nothing in the natural world. Corresponds to what we're doing. We are stepping outside of the natural world. There's no astronomy that corresponds to what we're doing. We're just every 7 days, acknowledging God. So that was okay. Thank you for asking that, because I think that's important.
It's also on a very visceral level, where there's nothing to look at. There's nothing to. It's not. like with the new moon or the full moon, you can like direct your gaze at something, whereas with the Shabbos it's more abstract because there's nothing physical that it corresponds to. So it's
Yeah,
easier.
that's, I think I forgot to put on the spreadsheet that, the Mishnah discusses what you do if you are wandering in the desert and you don't, if you're lost in the desert, you're Robinson Crusoe, but you forget what day it is and you don't know what to do. So do you count 7 days and then observe it as Shabbat? Like you have your own Shabbat, like you just start counting 7 days, and after 7 days, like that's your Shabbat. Or the day that you like wake up from your sleep, that's Shabbat, and then you count 7 days from there. And that's, I feel like that dispute is sort of like when Shabbat can be subjective in this way, that it's like your experience, like what is your, like what perspective are we supposed to adopt? So one perspective is, I guess, like the first humans who were created on the sixth day, and so for them, like day one is like, they're created Friday afternoon, and like bam, right away it's Shabbat, and then they have to wait another 6 days till the next Shabbat. Versus from the perspective of God, who like had a full week before Shabbat, and like which perspective are we kind of reenacting? Is it like God's rest after 7 days, or after 6 days, or is it our like eruption on the world as humanity? Like right at the beginning, it's Shabbat, and who do we recreate when we are like if we're lost somewhere, we don't know what day of the week it is? So why is that? Because I guess it's sort of like what's your from the subjective of the person who sees the sunset? Like what are we supposed to
No, I was just saying
encounter?
that, like, if you when you're celebrating the new month requires or involves
Mm-hmm.
an object with which to potentially
The new moon, right? You see the sliver of the moon in the sky, right? So again, here's why. Because you are seeing something with Shabbat. You are seeing the sunset. Shabbat, there is a physical.
Not if you're in Scandinavia.
Not if you're in Scandinavia.
It's no joke.
That's
People
true.
who grew up in Scandinavia, Shabbos didn't end for them. They'd go to sleep. and
Yes,
Sunday
yes.
would be
Not just
Sunday.
Scandinavia, also Scotland. I mean, much
Yeah.
more, less exotic places. Correct. We'll bracket that for now.
So see, in Sweden, it's very weird.
I'm sure.
the sun setting is not the cause of Shabbos because the sun sets on
Right, but it's a sunset. That's what I'm saying. It's a sunset interfacing with our counting, right? And so it's right. That's why it reminded me of that Mishnah, right? Because it's our counting interfacing with the sunset over the course of the week. I was in New York this summer for the Shabbos of. Wasn't I? I think I was for Shivas Tammuz, right? So Shivas Tammuz, 17th of Tammuz, the fast day was on a Saturday, so the fast began sunrise Sunday morning, right? The fast was pushed off to the Sunday, so Shabbat ended at whatever time it ended, like 9:15, and then like 4 in the morning the fast began. So I was in New York though, that Shabbat, and Rabbi Robinson, who's from Scotland, told me that in his childhood, like his memory of observing this holiday in Scotland was that the fast, the Shabbos wouldn't end until like 11:45 p.m. and the fast began at like 1:30 in the morning. So like Shabbat would end, you'd make Havdalah, you'd have like a snack, and then the fast would begin. So that was a very different, yeah. See, Jews shouldn't live in places like that. That's what I
I think that they've tried to make that point several times.
Okay. Other questions or comments on what we said so far? Anything on that? Yes, Marilyn.
I read in the Hertz Chumash that in Rome they tried having a 10-day week with 1 day Sabbath, and it didn't work out.
Okay. I wonder why it didn't. Why it didn't work? They say why.
Probably they were too tired.
Too tired. Okay, that's interesting. So that that is look. So indeed, it was the Christian influence on Rome that the seventh day week became like a thing in the West. A 10-day week makes a certain amount of sense because it's like the decimal system and our mathematical system is based on 10, so that sort of has that certain appeal to it. But this also maybe gets me to the fourth source, which is a book. Anyone read this book? Judy Shulovitz's book. You want to read this book? You did? Okay, I think it's good. I think the book is worth reading. I also, it's a woman who's like a serious Jew, but never quite like kind of made it as a Sabbath observant Jew. She sort of over like the course of her lifetime, she's flirted with being a Sabbath observant Jew. Never quite been able to like make that leap, and so the book is a partial memoir of her own like. ambivalence and yearning and kind of like, for exploration of Shabbat, and also a history of the idea of Shabbat in the Western world. And that part I think is, I think the personal memoir part is interesting if you're into that. I think she's an interesting person. She's a journalist. She writes for The Atlantic and for other, the New Yorker, and other magazines. But the intellectual history is also really, I didn't what I told you at the beginning, that the Puritans were part of their motivation for coming here is they wanted Sabbath to be more rigorous. That I learned that from her book. And she also has some interesting, she's a science writer also as a journalist, and she has some interesting things about the nature of time, which, okay, so here we are. In a study of the American laws that govern time, Harvard law professor Todd Rakoff asks us to imagine a world divided between two completely opposed kinds of regimes, a freedom of time regime and a constructed time regime. In the freedom of time regime, people dispose of their time as they see fit. And the law does nothing more than lay down and enforce the conditions under which individuals and institutions get to swap time for money, which is sort of how we live now. In the constructed time regime, the law designates a certain period of time as social time, or at least mandates that some amounts of time not be work time. But there's a flaw in the main assumption of the freedom of time regime, that time is, like money, a pure quantity to be divided and spent at will. 1 minute is not exactly like every other minute, because time changes as it flows. Time is qualitative as well as quantitative. The when of time, it's after what or before what or at the same time as what, matters as much as, if not more than, it's how much. It makes a big difference whether you do something now or wait till later. We know all this intuitively because we would have no social or professional lives if we didn't. So this speaks to, again, why did the 10-day work week not work well in Rome? There's not just a quantity aspect of time. Time also has a whenness, right? Not all time is the same. You can't just swap an hour now for an hour later and rearrange and expect everything's going to be fine. I'll work at night. I'll sleep during the day. I'll work day and night. I'll rest later. Right? That doesn't quite work. Yeah. Or okay. Let's continue. In a rare instance of double jeopardy, violations of Sabbath law incur both human and divine penalties. In the Bible, what makes God so harsh in his enforcement of the Sabbath? He must have considered violation of the Sabbath to be an offense against man as well as himself. A man gathering wood on the Sabbath is not only doing forbidden work, he violates the mutual non-compete clause that lets Sabbath keepers feel they can afford not to work. Right? If I stop work on Friday and everybody else is out there gathering wood, then I can't do that. It's not true. You can't swap time, right? It has to be a social compact. For anyone to be able to rest, everyone has to rest. If he gets away with it, then everyone else can too, and no one will be able to rest. I think that there's a lot of, a lot of discussion about how strict or not strict the kashrut agency should be with kosher restaurants that are open on Shabbat. And like every dilemma and controversy, there are two sides to that issue. But one side of that issue, just like to remember that if a kosher restaurant is allowed to be open on Shabbat, then being a restaurateur becomes a profession that it becomes, over time, will be impossible for a Sabbath-observant Jew, right? Because they'll have, my 7-day-a-week restaurant will have a competitive advantage over your 5.5-day-a-week restaurant. And so over time, if I'm a Sabbath-observant Jew, how could I possibly open a restaurant, not have it open on Shabbat? Right? It's not just if a choice becomes available, then sometimes the other option is no longer a choice. So there is so I think, that doesn't mean it's always so simple, but in terms of policy, but I think that's a dynamic, there's a social dynamic to that element of Jewish law, and there's a social dynamic to the Sabbath. It will no longer be feasible to keep the Sabbath, and that in the biblical construction of the holiday indicates that no higher form of social order can be maintained. Social order is built upon this construct, and it has to be communal. It can't be individual. And I think that's what you see, you see that loss in America. Let's say people have 5-day work weeks, 6-day, whatever it is, people have their days off, but there is no longer the spirit of Sabbath. There's no longer any notion that businesses are closed on Sunday, etc. and I think something, let alone, I mean, this book was written, she wrote the book, the dawn of the smartphone age, but now, people are work time, social time, family time, all kind of blends one into the other in a way that you're not fully present at work because you have devices pulling you towards other ways of thinking, and you're not fully present at home because your devices are connecting you to work, and time itself, what does it mean to be at work? What does it mean to be at home? What does it mean to be at rest or at play? All of these parts of our life which are important, work, play, rest, family, they all lose a lot of their quality because we don't have these boundaries for time. So I think that's the Sabbath as a social construct, that everyone does it on the same day, helps define certain times for certain functions, and I think gives order to society, and it's really enhancing. Yeah.
I was going to say you can see the same thing happening now, or in the last maybe 10 years with Thanksgiving and Black Friday.
Oh yeah.
So,
That's right.
One business opens earlier, and it just becomes this race to the bottom.
Like Friday starts on Thursday, there is no.
Right. And so now you have Black Friday. I don't remember that being a thing 10 years ago. I don't think people talked about. I mean, maybe
Not in the same way, but do you know why Black Friday is Black Friday?
No, I know why they call it that.
Right, but so no, it did not exist in that way. And what has changed is the internet and the ability to advertise those deals and to put those things out there. Because yes, you can put this in a circular of this Friday it opens at this time, but also in a world where it's no longer 5 o'clock we're done. Everyone is connected all the time, and as a result, we expect all of these businesses to be there all the time.
But it's also the economy.
It is also the economy.
in the globalized economy, the competitive pressure you think
No,
is much
the
more than.
economy right now, the people are having such a tough time that this is the one time of the year they can actually afford things.
I disagree with that.
Interesting. So I would maintain that there's still something there's something lost when our holidays become times for commerce, and something is lost. Most important, really, the part of which maybe we'll get us to the next source, then we can talk some more. The last source we'll look at, and then something certainly lost for the people who have to work at those stores, right? I mean, that's yeah. Okay.
I wonder if there's a conflict of values here between the value of rest and the value of letting people use their time as they want.
Great.
Because, right, well, okay.
Say, go, express it, yes. It's a perfect segue, but you have to say it, okay.
I mean, I already have qualms in society imposing values on, or saying, you ought to do this because it's valuable for you, as opposed to
Define for yourself your own.
right? So I see the argument that if there isn't mandated rest time, then nobody will be able to rest. But if there is mandated rest time, then the people who want to work won't be able to work during that time. So there maybe there's not.
Or the people who want to rest by going to the movies, as opposed to
Right.
singing mirrors. Or
I don't read her as saying I don't read her as saying the buses don't run on Shabbat.
okay.
I read her as saying we just don't go to work on a
Okay.
day of the
Okay.
week or something.
Okay.
But either way, if somebody would rather, work 9 to 4 every day, and then a few extra hours on Sunday or Saturday,
Right.
and that works better for them,
Right.
they can do that
Right.
because Sunday or Saturday their
Yeah.
office is closed. or something.
Yeah.
Or Marilyn mentioned Rome. Israel disposed of the siesta in the 80s, but in Rome they still religiously
Yep,
observe it
yeah,
2 to
yeah.
4. Businesses are closed.
And yeah, that's right. Well, that's yeah. I mean, that sets the whole culture that revolves
Right.
around that assumption. Because Sarah and I went to Paris years ago, and we went to the restaurants. We were going for dinner. It was 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and all the restaurants were closed. We were like, what happened? Why is no restaurant open? And then we had to wait until 8 o'clock. And then they all, we hadn't quite realized the time. It was,
But, I mean, the thing that concerns me, I'm sort of in sympathy with this idea of, I don't want imposition, and you take away all kinds of things when you impose it, but the time is money is also not true without Shabbat, because not all time is worth the same amount. So if you actually played with constructed time from that perspective, you would say like work time, should be 10 hours a week or 30 hours a week. Rest time should be 10 hours, and then it doesn't matter what work you do. Like it's calculated by hours allocated, not money made. And that could be interesting. So that kind of feels to me, even though like it's a rest time. So you all have to somehow construct rest time.
I see, but why should it have to be the same,
Right.
all in the same time?
Right.
Right,
So the Jews and observant Jews might construct rest time in a certain way.
Right.
But others might.
So what's added, what's the value added by everyone doing it on the same day? If you just say no one's allowed to work more than 40 hours a week, but everyone has to have 2 days off, and that's, you should mandate that could be you could have law code, that could be legislated even to protect those who might be vulnerable. Everyone has, but so what's lost by or what's added by having everyone do it on the same day? That's sort of the question. And then Rachel's question also was like, what about people who have divergent ways of expressing the time that's there? So what's I remember a friend saying, for me, Shabbat is about painting. That's what which like has a certain intuitive, right? It's calm, it's tranquil, right? But it's like totally like it's against it. It's very creative, right? It's not Sabbath friendly. Yes.
I don't think it has to be mandated. I mean, nobody's going to throw you in jail if you keep your restaurant open. Nobody's going to visit. Nobody's going to go there. That's all. So it's more just the fact that maybe these things collectively like evolved a certain way. Sabbath observance just sort of like happened, and then there's this like post justification for it that says this is mandated for you.
So people will go there, meaning people who aren't Sabbath observant will go to the restaurant, and then I, who am Sabbath observant, can't open a restaurant because how could I possibly compete with this restaurant that's...
No, I guess I'm just saying, like, in a more abstract sense, that, like, if we had a time that people didn't go to restaurants and didn't, like, work or do commerce, then it doesn't necessarily have to be mandated as long as... as long as there's a communal, as long as there's enough... Right, sure, no, that's true. Like, if everyone is really strict, if everyone is committed to it, it doesn't have to be legislated. It can just be social. That's true, yes.
One of the problems is that people are generally not good about sort of doing that, and sort of the economic pressures and all kind of other societal pressures very much wind up pushing against that and can cause people to, if they don't have some mandate, and it could be, we could talk about different kinds of mandates, because you could look in Europe, you have 30-hour work weeks that are to some extent legally mandated, or broad union protections on those kinds of things that lead to that. But without some sort of mandate, whether it's religious, legal, or otherwise, people are not, who are, fortunate enough to be able to get, employment, and then be pressured in a situation, provide reasons to work way more than they otherwise might want to. So that notion of being compelled while imposing on our sort of freedom of choice can also, I've had more than one person tell me, like, they wish they had, had some sort of greater degree of Jewish Sabbath observance, because they've seen, that there can be benefits to that. And then obviously the benefit of it being sort of, but picking a day is obviously a certain sense of community that can be built around that. I mean, it seems to me at least that it's not just sort of which of these several hours across the 7-day week might people pick to sort of, sort of have that be their time of rest. But it doesn't necessarily have to be in shul. It's a wonderful thing. But having some notion where people are doing it at the same time facilitates the building of community.
At some level, is it in a larger sense just a call for, it's maybe completely off base, but a call for self-respect in a way, like if everyone, in a really larger sense.
Fine, good.
So,
Go.
right, if everyone kind of looked inside, naturally, everyone may tend toward some time of rest anyhow, and that finding some way to organize it is just a loose construct for what serves individuals
Good.
best.
So Shabbat gives you the discipline to do what's best for you. There are also things we know are good for us, so it's hard for us to discipline ourselves. Shabbat gives us an external discipline to do what's best for us anyway, which is to set aside time, quality time, quite good. But here's something else. There's another element though which is important, which is like an element of social justice, which I think I want to get into. That's just too interesting. So Exodus 23, one of the locations in the Torah that the Shabbat is described, 6 days you shall do all of your stuff. The 7th day you shall rest. Laman yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha, so that your ox and your donkey shall rest. They're animals, they get to rest too. V'yinafesh ben amatzcha v'ager, and the stranger and the handmaid should be refreshed. They get v'yinafesh. That's like a more kind of spiritual refreshment. So you shall rest, so that the stranger and the handmaiden, that they should be able to be refreshed as well. And your Shabbat observance enables them to rest. Why does your Shabbat observance enable them to rest?
They're their master.
Yeah, because you're not asking them to do stuff, because they work for you. And so so the only way that they can get a day off is if you observe Shabbat. The Sforno spells this out.
And that's just as relevant to your ox and your ass, because you have to give your animals a break as well.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right, so you rest, they rest, everyone rests. This is source 3 of the Sforno. Right, we remember the exodus from Egypt. Throughout in Egypt, we were slaves. We had no rest. We had no interruption, and so we remember and honor the legacy of being slaves in Egypt by our resting. Because when we rest, then also the stranger, the servant, rests as well. And this, to me, very relevant again to I think Rachel's position. What if for me, why can't the buses run on Shabbat? Why can't I go to the beach? Why can't I go to the movies on Shabbat? Well, if the buses run, then the bus driver isn't getting Shabbat. And if you go to the beach, so the lifeguard isn't getting Shabbat. If you go to the movies, so there's somebody who's selling you popcorn who is not getting Shabbat. So only as something more robust and collective and communal do all the social classes benefit from Shabbat. So you could say, well, maybe the guy who sells popcorn, he takes Tuesday off. I mean, that could work, and at a basic level, it does work. Except if the guy who sells popcorn takes Tuesday off, well, his kids are in school on Tuesday, and his friends are at work on Tuesday. Right? It doesn't benefit from what you benefit from when you have your entire community has the same day off. Right? So if commerce is allowed and recreation is allowed to operate on Shabbat, then Shabbat is something for those who, in the upper classes and working class people or service people in the service industry don't have Shabbat. They may have a day off, let's say mandated by law, maybe they get to take Tuesday off or whatever it is, but that's different because it's only a small fraction of the economy. Their kids are in school, their spouses are working, they don't have all that we have from Shabbat. So it's in Europe, I think, the left is very much in defense of blue laws and defending, legal protections for the Sabbath. In Israel, it's not the case. In Israel, the left is against Sabbath restrictions. That sort of shows. But I actually think it's a very lefty, social consciousness, class consciousness idea that only through kind of a collective communal Shabbat does this class element kind of manifest itself, where everybody, working class, service class people, also get the benefit from Shabbat, which I think is everyone together. Yeah.
So what if we do that now? Why do we let other people work for us?
Good. So I have a friend who sort of, who lived in Israel for a long time and sort of doesn't understand how, Jews in America employ people on Shabbat and the synagogue we employ, Barbara's working on Shabbat. She sort of, and instead of having somebody working, we could have Turanut, right? In Israel, if this was synagogue in Israel, we'd have Turanut, and we'd have every Saturday there'd be 10 people who would be in charge of setting up Kiddush and cleaning up Kiddush, and no one would be paid, and that would be work fine, and that would be so why is that? Look,
It's a delay thing, right?
No. Look. So look. In fact, Chazal and the halacha is you are only Jews are obligated to keep Shabbat. That is I think that's how we understand the Torah. Second, it is in fact forbidden to ask someone who isn't Jewish to do anything on your behalf on Shabbat, absent very specific criterion. Okay, so in general, you can't do something, you can't ask a Gentile to do it for you. So that much is true. You are allowed, however, to ask a Gentile to do something for you that you could do yourself, right? And then the Gentile could do it in whichever way he or she finds most convenient. Okay, so you can, since it's possible to wash dishes in a Sabbath-compliant manner, using a Shabbos sponge, using cold water, right? You can wash it using liquid soap. You can wash dishes on Shabbat. A Jew can wash dishes on Shabbat. So you can also ask a Gentile, wash dishes, please. And he or she can then decide that, well, it's actually much easier for me to put them in the dishwasher and turn them out, right? Or use hot water and a sponge, because that's their choice. They're doing that for their own convenience, not because of you, because there is a way they could have done it in a Sabbath-compliant way. So that's another kind of angle. But most of the things that, the stuff that Barbara does here, so we could do it. She doesn't do anything. She doesn't do malacha here. She carries the kiddush food out and she cleans it up afterwards. So she's not doing anything actually that's a violation of Shabbat. It's a more comfortable day for us because we hire her to do it than setting up a system of Torah Newt. And I don't think that's... Look, America has a 5-day work week, so she doesn't work on Sunday in general, and she takes Tuesday off, right? So she does have, in theory,
But this seems very clear.
Yeah.
Again, the stranger and the handmaid will not work on Shabbat for you.
So in a certain... Right. So, no, it doesn't...
The fact that we're paying her...
You shall work so that they should also have a day off as well. So I think this...
And it's not going to Shabbat. So
in a Jewish society, an entirely Jewish society, I think it makes sense for Jews to severely refrain from what we do, so that everyone of all classes should be able to, right? I think if the beaches are open on Shabbat, if the buses run on Shabbat, if the restaurants open on Shabbat, then you're going to have a real class divide. And even if everyone only works 6 days a week, some people will not have a Sabbath day. In a modern American context, with a totally pluralistic society with a 2-day weekend, I don't think there's any social justice violation in hiring somebody to do something for you on Saturday. That I don't see, because they have Sunday as a day with their family. I think an interesting dilemma is a political dilemma would be a place like Bergen County, which is one of the last. Bergen County in northern New Jersey is, I think, one of the only places in America now with a large Jewish population, a large Shomer Shabbos Jewish population, and also very restrictive blue laws. There's these big malls in Bergen County, big Jewish communities in Teaneck and Englewood, Paramus, Fairlawn, right in Bergen County, and most of the big stores are closed on Sunday, which is a major inconvenience to people who can't go shopping on Saturday. So there, it seems to me, you have a divide between the Jewish self-interest is we really need to get these blue laws eliminated so that we can have a day for commerce, so for our own sort of needs as a Jewish community. On the other hand, maybe as we sort of recognize the value to a community of having, a day with less cars on the roads, less, so I think that's sort of, even there though, I think the fight for preserving Sunday as a distinct day in America this has been lost. And overall, that makes it better, it's easier to be a Jew now without blue laws, but I think America has lost something. Something that those of us who observe Shabbat in a robust way, we benefit from something that, everyone in America also benefited from 60, 70 years ago, when Sunday was still a special day and a different day. Now that Sunday is fully commerce, and no special clothes, no special family meals, no businesses are open. I think America has lost something, even though it happens to make it easier for us. So that's a dilemma that I not that it was our choice, but it's a dynamic that I think is a little bit of a dilemma. Are there reactions to what I said, or Marilyn?
When I lived in Edgewater, the president of the association put out a note that the workmen were working 6 days a week, but they had to finish by sunset on Saturday because of Sabbath.
Yeah.
And I said, well, when did she become religious? And so I looked it up on the internet, because I thought among the Christians it started midnight.
Oh, I see.
Well, among the Catholics, Sabbath starts at midnight.
Uh-huh.
Among the Protestants, it varies.
Fascinating.
Denominations. Some is sunset on Saturday, some is sunrise on Sunday.
Interesting.
Others, I don't remember which denomination said, well, it doesn't really matter what hours, it's just that Sunday should be distinguished from the rest of the
So was this a legal restriction, or was it just the building
No, it was
manager?
her.
Her own religious proclivities to the Sabbath. That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay. No, there are people who do. There are Americans who still have a Sabbath as a, as a day. I think the churches are still, some of them at least, are full on Sunday. It is it's not, nobody has it anymore. But I think with commerce that is so stores are not closed anymore. So yeah.
Of course, they can go to church and still go shopping.
That's also true. That's also true. Yes. Well, Adam and then that guy. Yeah.
The social justice observation you were making is interesting. So I think the Yom Kippur Haftorah is, is this the fast I want kind of thing. And then it's always had that sort of, then it has that adjustment at the end about if you, and it's the pasuk here, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, which has always felt to me a little bit of a weird shift. Like it's all this sort of,
I see.
all this social justice-y stuff in the Haftorah, and then it's about Shabbat. But this tying together of Shabbat for the purpose of, letting others be able to experience Shabbat.
That's nice.
Tie that together.
That's very nice. I think it also could be the other tie-in could just like the sort of the hypocrisy of somebody who I'm very careful. I'm not gonna, I would never cook my tea in a, without a shlishi, but I'm gonna stand in the back of shul talking about stock market. Like that's sort of the, I think also the attitude of like I can talk about whatever I want because that's just talk. But like no, like if you actually care about the spirit and the meaning, like the whole day should be kind of sacred and imbued with like a different spirit, and but that works too. What you just said. Becky, you were saying something?
Yeah. So, but then how is it halakhically okay? Because we can't ask someone to do something that we can't do at the time, but in advance you can set that up.
No.
So the elevator thing is just kind of a helpful convenience.
The elevator thing is it's okay for a different reason. If it's those who say it's okay, which include me, it's for a different reason because the pushing the button is not a real malacha anyway. It's not a and walking more than let's say 6 or 10 flights would be like an unreasonable hardship, and that would put you either be danger or would be a tsar, would a real discomfort. And so asking a Gentile to do a task for you, which isn't really a malacha, to avoid being in a situation where even a healthy person would find it like physically taxing for the sake of being able to have a pleasant Shabbat and get to shul and have a Shabbat meal and do mitzvot of that sort, we say is okay. So it's a number of different factors combining to make it okay to ask someone to push a button for you. But you couldn't say to somebody, I want you to come tomorrow on Saturday and sew my skirt or something, a tear or whatever, okay.
Just going back to where you started, which was constructing Shabbat as over and against nature, and Shabbat is unnatural. And I think that, although I'm going to sort of insert the word culture, but I kind of think that you could, from a biblical perspective and onward, you could sort of say, in a way, Shabbat is like anti-nature, anti-culture.
Yes.
Or in contrast to, and I wonder what. So there's an element of defiance in it, right? And we're defying the natural. We're defying the prevalence of like whatever society.
Defying culture by like we're stepping out. We're not engaging in commerce. We're stepping aside from society, right? I mean that would be very different in, in a.
But I was just going to make one last point, which is if the state legislates it.
Yes, then it's not.
Then you actually get, I don't know that you get to inhabit that defiance.
That's interesting. If Shabbat is supposed to be countercultural, we are Jews, we have a different calendar, a different ethos, we're going to step out from general society one day a week and have our Sabbath. But if everyone is doing it, especially if it's forced by the legislature, then can you...
I don't mind if everyone's doing it, but just they shouldn't be doing it because the state's mandating it. But they can be doing it because God's mandating it.
Well, but if everyone's doing it, then it's not really countercultural though, right?
But you are countercultural because it's still not natural.
It's not natural, gotcha.
Right? So in other words, so at the simplest level, if everyone's doing it, we're against nature. And at a much more normal level, we're.
Very nice, very nice. Look, I think also the melachot themselves, we shouldn't talk about the content of Shabbat, but the melachot, the 39 categories of labor, they're all these are things that create culture, right? The material culture, physical surroundings, all of the steps needed, that is what the melachot, it's food, clothing, shelter, a few others, that's what the melachot are defined by, that's culture, that's material culture. So we stop that for one day. We don't, all these things are wonderful, they make civilization, they make our culture, but one day we can inhabit the world as it exists, as we've made it, as we've transformed it, and not rather than continue to engage in that creative process. think it's the final thought, sort of, like in terms of creating the Sabbath and sort of that, there's I think that also for me speaks to some of these like elements of Shabbat observance which aren't as clearly rooted in like extensions of the 39 Melachot. The 39 Melachot are basically mostly agricultural. Already in the rabbinic period, when Jews left the farms and moved to the cities, even during the week, we weren't doing these melachot anymore, most of that, right? I mean, when was the last time any of you threshed, right? Or probably nary a thresher in the room all week long, or did most of the melachot. Probably some of them you've never done in your life, right? You've probably never skinned an animal or made a loom or whatever, right? So we don't do these things anymore, and in the rabbinic period, they instituted this whole category of muktzah, which was about, according to Maimonides, let's add a few more restrictions on Shabbat so that it's a little bit more distinct. Because now that we're living in cities, like the old biblical stuff isn't quite sufficient for us. And to me, that's a dynamic that's very much at play in the restrictions on electricity, which, at first I thought maybe it's like fire going through the wires, but it isn't. And then Chazon Ish suggested when you complete a circuit, it's like you're completing a tool when you turn it on. So anytime you turn on an electric circuit, that's like an act. But really, it's more akin, that's just operating a switch. You're not really creating something. That's like a folding chair. You're not building a chair, you're just opening a folding chair. And a switch is more akin to a folding chair than finishing a device, because it's meant to go on and off. And it seems, according to like Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and many poskim, that there's no malacha per se inherent in electricity, depending what the device is doing. An electric lawnmower is definitely cutting grass. That's a malacha, biblical prohibition. But there's no malacha per se in using electricity, but not using electricity is like so definitional of Shabbat because it's so pervasive in our 6-day lives. I don't know, I reach into my pocket on Shabbat, like, where's my phone? Like, what, it takes me a while to get over that on Shabbat. So not, even though there might not be a clear malacha, it's so, like, I think important for a day being different, a day being distinct. I think, Rachel, the risk of that even though I think that subjectivity is so important, and Shabbat with, like, using a phone would be, I don't know, that would be, like, without the restrictions on electricity, I think the day would be so, like, I don't do malacha at all. Like, I just use electricity during the week, so it's so important. The risk is that it's very subjective, and if you were, I spoke about this once also, before. It can be subjective, and there are things that for me and maybe for many of us are just like so obvious, so inherent. Like this is what makes the day special and different. There may be others who don't experience that way, and for them it just makes the day tedious and isolating. And that's, I guess, the other side of that coin. I mean, what Judy Shulevitz, when her book was reviewed in the New York Times, I don't remember who wrote the review. I just remember she wrote, "Look, you should try, getting your kids, bathed and a meal cooked and all that's done by like 4:15 on a Friday. Like, you try that for 5 years and then you write a book about this beautiful, So it's not so easy. It's not as easy as okay. Thank you very much. Next lectures in the series, Malka Simkovich is coming back. She is a phenomenal teacher. Her lectures last year were very popular and superb. She's speaking once on, she's a professor at Catholic Theological Union. She teaches early Judaism, Second Temple Judaism. She's first lectures on like the Hanukkah story in ancient history and its sort of, and further iterations of that. And the second lecture is on Jewish rebellions in the ancient world and how the rabbis understood them and responded to them. So these are 2 December lectures. Saturday night, Rachel Berkowitz is she and I are having a dialogue about halakha and change and challenges. A dialogue.
I didn't realize she was doing it.
She's in Skokie for Shabbat. Okay, and if 9 p.m. Maariv will begin hopefully very soon. Thank you.